Hello and welcome to Walk the Talk, our version of a podcast where you walk, if you want to, while we do the talking. Now, we don't want to be adding to your virtual fatigue, so if you're up for it, plug your earphones in and listen while you take us on a walk. Around the house, around the block, wherever it might be. Use the next 45 minutes to move your body and nourish your mind. I'm Sean, one of the co-founders and trainers at Point 3 Wellbeing, and I'm fortunate enough to be hosting today's Walk the Talk. This is the next in our series aimed at HR professionals, business leaders, and those interested in mental health and well-being of the people within the workplace. Now, for the live audience that are joining in, thank you for taking the time out of your no doubt busy days. If you have any questions for us as we move through this conversation, then please do throw them into the chat function and we will try to answer those as we go along. Now, in this episode of Walk the Talk, we will be diving into human connection in the corporate world. We will look at why this is so important and how it is weaved into an organization's culture. Now, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Matt Vickers for this conversation. Matt is a practising integrative psychotherapist and a corporate mental health specialist. He recently left BP, where he played a pioneering role in driving a culture of well-being. Now, I'm going to let Matt jump in and further introduce himself, particularly regarding how pivotal his dual roles have been in driving that employee well-being agenda. So, Matt, a little bit of intro, please.
Thank you, Sean, and it's a pleasure to be here as well. So thank you for inviting me. And so my initial expertise, my original degree was in accounts and management. So I spent some time in the big four accounting firms before I moved to BP, where I held a variety of accounting roles, trading roles, really had an opportunity to get to know the business. And I got promoted fairly frequently. It felt like my career was going really well, but something wasn't quite clicking for me. It wasn't quite content. And each time I changed roles, I thought this will be it. But the same patterns happen. After 6 months, it kind of wears off. And I was left a bit empty. And it was this point, I thought, what is it? It's not my environment, it's not my jobs because I change and it comes back. It's how I feel about it. It became more of an inner journey. And it started me looking a little bit further. And that's when I started looking at psychotherapy and started a psychotherapy training and started my own psychotherapy as well. And that took me on a real journey. And I realized a lot of what I was missing was that connection, that purpose, that meaning that comes with mental health, with good mental health. And the training for me was life-changing. It changed the whole lens through which I see the world, through which I see life. And I kept going deeper and deeper into this route and moved from being full-time at BP to part-time. And I came to the end of my training and I thought, what do I do now? Do I become a full-time therapist? Do I stay at BP? And I wasn't sure. But in therapy, we look at dreams. Dreams can be messages from the unconscious. And I had a dream asking me to try and bring them both together. So I set up a volunteer group to look at mental health within BP, along with a few others. And it was one of the best things I've done as well. So this was whoever was interested. So when you said at the end, the podcast is aimed for HR managers, leaders, and anyone who's interested in mental health. This is really targeted at that latter stage. And we initially was going to be a men's mental health group, though that very quickly became much, much broader. But the very first meeting was so pivotal for me. And I remember looking around the room and there was 14 guys, some of which I knew or thought I knew quite well, and some I didn't know as well. And we went around the room and shared why I was interested in mental health, our personal journeys, or how it's impacted the ones we love. And it was the first time in my corporate life I felt maybe I belong here. Maybe this is where I'm supposed to be. I felt connected. and it changed everything. I suddenly had so much motivation for workplace, so many more friends, and it was through the lens which I looked at and felt so much more content. And we started breaking stigmas, talking about our journeys, putting on events, and it really took off. We started running training for champions, and then during COVID, we went to a new level and we started running conversation cafes, running events for World Mental Health Day, getting in guest speakers, having weekly wellbeing challenges to help us focus on self-knowledge and self-care. And it really, really took off. We even created a video, This Is Me, several of those. So with that, this culture of change really started to ripple out. And when we started talking about mental health was a passing, not great today, moving on. So open conversations around, have therapy. And this is my therapist, this is what we talk about. I meditate. Meditate wasn't something we could openly talk about, especially have long hair like me and feel a bit too woolly. But it became different. I know when I started my therapy, which was 2007, I was having physio because it didn't feel okay to say.
That stigma.
That stigma. And of course, it still exists, but the journey on this is so different now. So that was quite a long intro. Probably should say I did finish BP at the end of this year, as I've started a new chapter, I guess, where I want to bring some of this to other corporates, as well as focus on that individual therapy piece. So sorry, Sean, I hope that wasn't too long.
No, that's really interesting, Matt. And I think what is amazing is that you've clearly got such a vast learning from how you've been able to integrate this really supportive culture within a huge organization the size of BP. Now, if you don't mind me asking, when did you kick off the Wellbeing program? Kind of that first meeting, do you remember what year that was?
Yeah, so that first meeting, it was me and a peer who came together, and we was just hoping we could get someone else to join us, so it could be a free, maybe like you guys, point for it.
Yeah. And
I emailed maybe 30 of the guys I knew who might be interested, and pretty much half of them took up. I was flabbergasted. It was like pushing an open door.
Yeah.
No one was saying it. And that must have been maybe 5 years ago.
Okay. So that was back in 2016, 17 type time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Somewhere around then.
Amazing. And it's so great to hear that that uptake was so quick, even in what I imagine is a very male-dominated environment, BP. But it does show that power of connection, how much people are striving for that, particularly in the workplace.
It really does. And it was quick. And what really struck me is if you have someone to champion it, someone to start the conversations, to almost be a corporate influencer, how you hear the YouTubers are, in the external world. You've got a pivotal point for it, to hold the torch for it, to give others permission to talk about it. And you ripple that out, so it's not just one, you have other champions who are doing the same. Like wildfire.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so exciting, I think, to hear, is that it's getting those champions on board that are going to then start to spread that word. It's a bit of the people power, that movement to start to really create that kind of that change that you want to see on an individual level, and of course on an organizational level as well. Now, just quickly diving into a bit of the kind of the science and the theory behind connection, because I believe that connection in the workplace is such an important thing to have, to establish, because that is then what can start to drive those cultural shifts. Now, of course, connection is something that is innate within us, in our kind of human DNA. It's been something that our ancestors relied on so heavily. Obviously, our ancestors weren't the biggest, the strongest, they didn't have the sharpest teeth, but what they did have was this ability to come together, to connect, to see off threats when needed, and to create that that space where individuals could come together and form that group. And
Yeah.
of course, that's what's enabled us to move to the top of the food chain. But in terms of the corporate world, why do you see connection as playing such a pivotal role?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sean. And I think when we talk about mental health and we talk about inspiring change, we connect through stories. And for example, if I was to give you my shopping list, it's pretty dull. You probably won't remember it. You probably won't be inspired. But if I told you I was making a cake and it was a lemon drizzle cake, you'd be inspired to what it is and the ingredients, and you'd remember it more. And it's the same with mental health. We connect through stories, and we're then inspired, we're motivated, we feel something. And when we feel something, life becomes richer. And in a nutshell, that's what connection is. And throughout COVID, I ran something we call mental health huddles, which is effectively a group of people come together to share how they're doing on that day, sometimes a longer theme, sometimes with a brief piece of meditation. I ran 2 a week for 2 years, and we'd always have so many people come. And within those, it was amazing to hear the level of trust, of sharing, of connection. And it was, in many ways, for a scholar of life, which I feel I am, I look at human nature, it was a huge amount of research, of information around what it means to be a corporate employee. And actually, what is happening more and more is we're not corporate employees, we're people. And the workplace is just another place where people come together, and that work self and private self is blurring. Some boundaries, maybe with some lines, whatever's safe for you. But if we can feel that safety, that psychological safety, that connection at work, we can really flourish as humans. And then we bring more to all that we do. So through some of these huddles, there was a couple of stories that really stand out for me. One of them is BP going through redundancies, having to do similar amount of work with less people.
Yeah.
And it's same for many organizations, it's always a challenge. And firstly, having a place to vent makes a huge difference. We can often close it down as humans, maybe as leadership, as organizations, but we do that person and ourselves a disservice. We need a place to vent, get it out of our system. But then once we've done that, we can start looking at what is there, what can help. We can't help people do more work in less time. We can't help them do the job. I don't know their job. However, someone said to me, do you know what, with connection, with respect, I can almost get through anything, providing we have that relationship. And okay, we need to work what it will be longer term, but this is a real hump. So it's that camaraderie, it's that partnership. You'll see it a lot on the sports field. So I'm a football player and a football coach, but when you have a team that gels, it's because they have that camaraderie. They can talk to each other, they connect, and it's the same in the workplace.
Yeah.
And the second story that really stood out for me is when someone was leaving through voluntary redundancy. They said to me, what has happened here during this time has really shown me what I want in an organisation for mental health, how important that is to me. The job's one thing, but to know there's that mental health connection aspect. That's what's important. That's what I'm going to be looking for in my future employer. That's the questions I'm going to be asking in the interviews. And it really brought it to the forefront of, wow, I feel that. I'm biased. I feel that.
Yeah.
But that's how important it is.
Absolutely. And I think that's so interesting. I mean, just touching on that first point that you raised around that psychological safety within an organization and providing that ability to vent by creating that psychologically safe space, then that means that those individuals will be able to vent. And what's the benefit of that? Well, it enables them to complete the stress cycle. As you say, if they're not venting, they're not going to be able to look at what are the next steps they need to do. They need to complete that stress cycle before they can almost bring that clear head and focus to the situation. And then just with regards to that second story, I think it's fantastic to hear that individuals are seeing the relevance and the importance of organizations supporting their mental health. And it's so interesting when you speak to HR managers and they say that so many of the conversations that they're being asked now to potential new recruits is, what is the well-being and mental health agenda within your organization? What are you doing to support your people? And in essence, how will I be supported moving forward? So it shows that kind of creating that space of connection and psychological safety and having well-being and mental health on the agenda is so important in order to start to establish that workplace culture.
It really is. And we're looking for so much more from the workplace than what we used to. I think the famous 90 book by John Whitmore talks about EQ, IQ, and SQ, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual intelligence. And we're looking for that from the workplace. And we're evolving as society, as civilization, the way we work, when we work, working from home, we're looking for more from that. And I think we should, as we lift our vibration as a species. And that piece around asking for more from it, or even to add a little bit further on the connection piece. When we went through the redundancy cycle, we held a variety of conversation cafes, some for line managers, some for the people that were leaving. And the people that were leaving, in some cases, not all, because it was a huge range, but in a small number of cases, they was feeling bereft. They was feeling like they didn't matter, that it hadn't meant anything, and no one was speaking to them. They felt alone and like no one cared. And then we speak to line managers and like, I'm heartbroken and leaving, but I don't know what to say to him. I don't want to make it worse, so I'm not saying anything.
Yeah.
And this vacuum of silence damages our mental health. It damages our sense of confidence and well-being and connection. However, if we talk to each other and the line manager said how they were feeling to this person, that person would have had a really different experience from leaving the company. And maybe to their self-esteem. So that again is how important connection is and how they think of the company in time to come. So emotional intelligence is so much more important than it's ever been. And we can't avoid to include spiritual intelligence as well in whatever way that comes out for someone.
I can understand why managers aren't having these conversations because it's uncomfortable. And I think when I reflect back on why I maybe wasn't having those conversations that I should have been having as a manager, why was that? Well, it wasn't because I didn't care, but it was because I was so afraid that I didn't have the answers for that person. If they came to me and they said something that I didn't know, then I felt like I was being put on the spot, or it would make the situation worse. But the reality of it was actually just saying, this situation isn't ideal. I'm really sad by the situation and I don't know what to say, but I just want you to know that this is where I'm at with it as well. And I'm here to support you in any way. It starts to create that conversation rather than creating that, rather than leaving that silence, and drives that connection. Even if there is nothing that you as a manager can do that's obvious to support those individuals within your team, just keeping that line of communication and therefore connection open.
Absolutely. There's a great Brené Brown video called Sympathy versus Empathy. You may have seen it. We
play it in all of our mental health awareness training. It's fantastic.
Great. So did we as well, because it's that line you said as well. I don't know what to say, but I'm going to be here with you. I'm going to listen.
Yeah.
There's a difference between sympathy and there's a difference between empathy. As a therapist, one of the core qualities I come back to is empathy. And if I can give empathy, I'm going a long way towards healing. Where we go from that is somewhere else. Giving empathy and showing empathy and creating an environment for empathy makes a huge impact. And that means starting an awkward conversation. And the reason why empathy can be difficult, as this video very cleverly shows you, is because you have to connect with a feeling which is uncomfortable within you. It won't be the same, but you know the feeling: fear, scared, anxious. You have to connect to that part in you. to be empathetic with that individual. And that needs vulnerability as well.
What I love about empathy as well from a manager's perspective is it doesn't mean you need to solve anything. So it takes the pressure off as well. So for me, if I'd been aware of that back as a manager, I would have spent a lot more time looking to open up those conversations without that fear that I know I did have deep down. It was rooted in there, if I'm being totally honest with myself.
Yeah.
Now, kind of when you kind of get to that perspective of looking at the culture within the organization, how do you start to shape those cultural shifts? Obviously, back in 2017, when you started to have these conversations, mental health, well-being wasn't on the agenda. It wasn't something that was naturally being talked about. But you've got to the point where by 2022, when you left BP, it was on the tips of everyone's tongues. It was an open conversation. How did you start to drive that cultural shift within the organization?
Yeah, there's a few things that I think of there. And lots of organizations have really good intellectual information on this, and BP did as well at the time. But when we're talking about emotions, the intellect is only one part. And when we're overwhelmed with data, drowning in data and lacking in wisdom is a great phrase. And it felt like at that time, I don't have time to read a document. And if it's one or inclination, and if it's one around emotions and mental health, it doesn't connect with me in the same way. So how can we make it more experiential, relational connection? How can we have psychoeducational entertainment to do that? And what I mean by that is an educational piece of work which is entertaining for our emotions, for our psyche. So these were some of the questions we asked ourselves. And that was kind of the backdrop towards this. And another really significant piece, before I come back to that, is I'm one person. With the relationships I have, I can reach so many people, but not that many in an organisation the size of BP. But individually, each person that's interested in it has a new network of people they can reach, and so on and so forth. So having a group of champions that look after mental health, who are passionate about mental health, who want to put it on the agenda, who live and breathe it, who are role models for it, who are beacons for people to come towards, is that wildfire effect I talked about. And there's a great statistic out there, I think it was Simon Sinek who said this, around to create a movement, you need 13.5% of the population to buy into it. After that, you've got the momentum, the critical mass, and it rolls out. We very much went along that path. So we invited anyone who was interested, regardless of anything, grade, job role, location, race, gender, anything. It didn't matter. What mattered was, are you passionate about this? And if you are, that's the people we focused on. And there's so many people passionate about this in an organisation. So many. And 13.5% is actually quite a low number when you really look at how many people in an organisation are passionate about it. But we focused on those. And within that, there's a varying degree of what people want to be involved in. See, people want to attend, want to take in the information. Some people want to be part of the movement and drive it. Some people want to influence their sphere, their team, their network. And we want and need all of those. So how do we empower this network of people? Start to become an ever-increasing focus. We need a drumbeat of information, of background, stuff that keeps that culture, that tone alive. But then we need that network to really bring it to life, that experiential piece, their networks for their teams. And then the piece that drives change. You have the bigger events, maybe have 2 or 3 a year, maybe have a guest speaker, maybe you have a panel event, but it all needs to be psychoeducational entertainment, and the focus on the entertainment. Who wants to see another PowerPoint that doing the shopping list or the banking or clearing emails through? We want to see people have real conversations, share their stories, and bring it to life, from people at the top to all the different levels in between. And what this network of champions really does, or really does in our case, is sometimes you hear organizations have fantastic leadership at the top and maybe a few tiers below. And then you get this frozen middle. Sometimes are great, sometimes aren't. And it stops, it doesn't get any further. Well, that's quite a gamble, isn't it? Why not empower anyone at any level who's passionate about it to carry that torch and bring people along the way? So I'm passionate about that one.
I think that's really, really interesting. I think what is hopefully incredibly powerful and useful information for an organization that's looking to drive really positive cultural shifts is it's just 13.5% of the organization that you, or of the group that you need to get on board. And 13.5%, as you say, isn't a big number. Actually, that's just over 1 in 10, isn't it? So the reality of it is it's very likely that 1 in 10 people within your organization are going to be passionate about this conversation, are going to be passionate about driving this agenda. And so actually focusing on them, that then starts to create that movement, because you've got that conversation happening at the desks next to you. You get those people that are then encouraging others that are maybe less interested to come along to these sessions that are being put on. And I'm sure when you first started these sessions back in 2017, probably you were getting just the 13.5% along. But by the end, I'm sure you were getting a significantly bigger proportion of the population along, because of that that kind of, noisy neighbor, as we like to think of them, in your ear, just encouraging you to think about these things. And so I think that's the other big thing, I guess, is it wasn't that you just start with those 13.5% and then you may be disappointed when only a small number of people have turned up to the training that you're putting on. Actually, it's then in a couple of years' time that 13.5% will start to swell and increase.
It is, and 13.5%, people want to get involved in different ways, and there's always going to be percentages of people that don't, and there's always going to be a percentage of people that do. If you start to focus your time on people that don't, who may never want to, you're starting to use your resource, your enthusiasm, your passion falling on deaf ears. People that really want it and can really carry it, then you're creating an energy, you're creating a momentum. And with that comes something quite tangible as well. In the early days, what really interested me, surprised me maybe, or maybe it was just how it was, is people wanted to come to events but didn't come because of the stigma of going to events. And the culture within there was, oh, mental health, okay, what's my line manager going to think? Having therapy, what's that going to do for my career? Calling VAP, is that really confidential? And kind of all of those out there, because it was such a closed culture on mental health. The more people can talk about it, not just one person, not just a leader, but every person at every level who's comfortable, you change that culture. You can't change a culture through one person at the top and dictate it down. Helps, but it needs everyone to really care, who does care, and talk about it. And what shifted most in the attendance is some of that stigma change. Oh, so we can talk about mental health. Can be me. Actually, that's okay. You're talking about going to therapy. You're talking about meditation. You're talking about all these events that are coming on, like you're talking about our team meeting. And that normalizes it. And that made a huge difference. And that makes a difference when it's just not a centralized team or a leadership team, but when it's throughout the organization in a variety of teams from people who care. Only people who care, because the only criteria we had when we ran events was, Are you passionate and enthusiastic about mental health? Do you really care? Then great. That's it. If it's a bit of a tick box, then it's something different.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was your strategy with recruiting these wellbeing champions, these mental health advocates? How did you go out and find these people within an organization the size of BP? Because of course you wouldn't know everyone in the organization. You probably wouldn't know 10% of people within the organization or even 1%. So how did you go about in an organization of that size and start that recruitment process? What was it that got these people aware of it and on board?
Yeah, I'm a natural introvert as well, so I definitely didn't know a large proportion.
So you weren't on the loudspeaker at the front gate every day?
No, just special occasions. It's how do you create awareness that mental health matters? So how do you put on some events? There's a whole host of mental health days in the calendar. And as a therapist, I was a little surprised to see how many of them there are. But still, they're great because there's some flags in the ground for you to focus around. There's some media attention to them. So we started focusing on some of those, putting on some events, asking a guest speaker to come along to talk about mental health, having some speakers from the organisation, and starting to build some awareness. At the end of each event, asking people if they wanted to join a distribution list. So that the event starts to get regular information, and then someone joins, tells their friend, and then tells their friend. So that drumbeat of information, which for me was for Wellbeing Challengers, really kept it alive. Then you start advertising training. And if the training is real, if it's personal, if people are really sharing their stories and it's experiential, it creates a different feeling within and a different experience. That you start to get a feeling of change, you start to live it, or at least I did. And from what I've seen, a lot of people did as well. And then it's word of mouth. In many ways, it's a bit like that with therapists as well. It's not so much of a hard sell, because how can you do a hard sell on mental health? You can only help people who want to be helped. It almost becomes that word of mouth. And when it's done with the right heart, it really grows. So that's a very brief overview.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's incredibly insightful. I think what's also useful knowledge here is that I'm sure that when you kicked off, you didn't have these big kind of well-being budgets that no doubt you probably have nowadays. So therefore, it's looking at who are the people that are interested in it, bring them on board to start the conversation with those people around them, looking for those internal speakers that are willing to stand up and tell their story, and then of course that kind of regular drumbeat of kind of mental health conversation to kind of really break through that stigma and not to make it a taboo. And that I'm sure you've mentioned in the past, there's been things like those emails that go out on the regular at a kind of regular intervals that kind of keep that conversation going. And of course, it's a great way to reach wide portions of the organization. So you don't need to start these programs with huge budgets. It's just that energy, that passion, and of course, a little bit of time as well that is needed to invest into this. But I think that's really, really helpful knowledge in of itself.
Isn't it? It's a great question, the budget, because we did speak about that many times, and we had minimal budgets, if any, most years. And when we did get some budget, it was nice. Or did it make much of a difference, actually, as I reflect on it? I'm not sure. It does. It gives you a greater pull if you can pull in a guest speaker that you pay for. But when it comes from us, when we own it ourselves, then there's something slightly different about it. People care more. They're bought into it. They know others who care more. So the budget is a really interesting question. I actually think I think the ideal scenario is to do a lot of events without a budget, to pull in people who want to volunteer their time, and then to actually have a budget for guest speakers. But you do need someone who's willing to spend their time doing that. So maybe the budget more is in the role.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's creating space for an individual within the role to have the capacity to take a bit of ownership and to drive the agenda forward and to keep that regular drumbeat going, to kind of break through that stigma. And we've had a comment from Eric, who it sounds like he might work at BP, or maybe did work at BP with you.
Of course, I do know Eric very well.
Yeah, fantastic. And he said the messaging regarding mental health not being a taboo subject is largely ingrained in the corporate culture now. But flashback 5 years, could you imagine someone saying that back then?
No, it's well, it almost gives me kind of goosebumps to hear it.
I can imagine.
Because, as I say, I remember the first time I talked about meditation, I was really like very conscious of saying it, just saying the word, even though it's one of the most important things we can do in our life. And I don't say that lightly. The benefits of it, physically, emotionally, the anchoring of it is huge. But naming it, I was cautious. Having so many people openly talk about going to therapy, about having bad days, about facilitating a space where others can talk about it with genuine empathy. It's well, it's one of the things I'm really proud of to see, and it kind of putting that there, it reminds me of that. And it's not to say it's like that for everyone, it's not.
Of course.
In many ways, I still think we're still at the start of this journey. This is the spark for it to go. There's still a lot more to go. But there's a really, really strong foundation.
That's fantastic. And when you've created these strong foundations, it takes effort, it takes energy. There's no doubt about that. And it's not like it's something that you can do once and then kind of think it's done. That box is ticked. Therefore, culture has shifted. You have to keep it going. But for an organization that keeps this stuff going, that focuses on that culture and that connection, what do you think the impact is for those people working within the organization?
Yeah. Do you know when we don't keep it going? One of my pet hates, actually, is when an organization goes through a really tough time. But at the bottom we go, if you're struggling with this, speak to EAP. And what they're effectively saying is, don't talk to me, talk to someone else. And they think they're doing it in an empathetic way. And I don't think that's very well received ever by anyone. Because if that's all they're putting on that and it goes away, where's the substance? Where's the belief? I think you need that regular conversation, that regular feedback, that regular showing that people do care, that mental health is important, to create that environment of psychological safety. When you have that, signposting the AP is great, but I'd never put it at the end of like that, because you're distancing yourself from the impact it's having. So you need to address that, whether you're the leader who's sending the email, a team leader, or a colleague. You need to address that in the email and then signpost what support is available if they want it. But putting yourself forward first, because that's genuine caring. That's the experience. So if we do it once and it goes away, it's not believed. So if we continually do it, to come back to your question, the impact for the organization is, oh, maybe this is real. Maybe we do care. Maybe it is safe for me to talk about it. Maybe I should look at the AP, or maybe use the private healthcare to look at therapist, or go private, or speak to a champion, or go on the training, or speak to my line manager about the challenges I'm having. Because ultimately, there's a quote out there as well, how a line manager has a bigger impact on your mental health than your doctor. So true as well. I mean, I don't even know who my doctor is. So how can I impact my mental health really? But the line manager who you deal with day in and day out, and it's not really just your line manager, it's your colleagues, it's your family. If you can't talk to them about how you're doing, then it is going to be harder. So that organization that continually keeps putting it out there, keeps holding that space and holding that torch, will have a huge impact on the employee, on the individual. They will make their life so much more congruent inside and work and outside of work, and reduce anxiety, stress, and therefore allow that person to flourish. I mean, I believe not only does it make a difference to the workplace, which is less of concern to me, I think it's morally the right thing to do.
Yeah.
To make a better world, and
Yeah.
to make a better world for that person. I'm quite an idealist.
Yeah. Well, you've got to be there, haven't you? You've got to start idealistic. You've got to start with that blue sky thinking, and what is it that is the perfect solution? And then maybe it's not going to quite end up there, but it's going to at least give us kind of the goalposts to shoot for, which I know you're a footballer, so I thought I'd give you that football analogy. But I think it's really, really interesting that you've just talked there about creating that psychological safety. And of course, the impact for that in good times when life is rosy. It's not necessarily something that people will maybe realize is happening. But I think when you've created that culture of psychological safety during those challenging times, like we've just had the pandemic, of course, when kind of mass redundancies are happening, it's during these times where people then feel like they can vent, they can talk openly. It takes some of the stress and the anxiety out. It enables people to understand why decisions are being made. They're not made personally, they're made from a business perspective, which hopefully will then drive the kind of the performance and create that that safe space, and reduce those challenging things like stress and anxiety coming into the equation. If we can talk openly, then that will really really support us. So
absolutely. And sorry, just one thing to add on that.
Yeah.
One of my favorite quotes by Gandhi, I like most of Gandhi's quotes actually, but one of my favorite is "Be the change you want to see in the world." So the title of this, and the reason why I like that, and the reason why I think that's relevant, is as a line manager, as a colleague, as a leader, if you want people to open up, they're not going to open up because you tell them to. We're going to open up because of your example. So Paulo Coelho also says as well, it's not your opinions that change the world, it's your example. So if you want to create that culture of safety, regardless of your role in the organization, be that change you want to see. Show that vulnerability, share your story.
Yeah, I love that. And those senior leaders stepping up and sharing a bit of their own vulnerability, it takes them off that pedestal, and it makes other people realize that, yes, they're incredibly successful, but at the same time, life isn't perfect for them. They have their own challenges, and that can only have knock-on positive impacts for the culture kind of within the rest of the organization.
It is. And some leaders aren't that way inclined, and that's okay. Not everyone is.
Yeah.
To be a leader in mental health doesn't mean you have to be a leader in your organization. You can be anyone. So if your leader's not doing that, you can step up and show them that way. We all can be empowered in that, and that power to the people that you said earlier. I believe in that, and you can be that leader, whoever you are, whatever you are.
Yeah, love that. Well, thank you so much, Matt. It's been a really insightful conversation, as all of the conversations that I have with you always are. Now, we finish by asking our guests to share their 3 well-being non-negotiables at this point in time, because we do know it changes week to week, month to month. These are those things that support us to feel balanced day to day. And often we like to encourage people to think of these through the lens of this simple question, which you positively complete. I believe I can cope with whatever life throws at me so long as I. Be really interested to hear what your 3 things are, Matt.
Yeah, I love that, Sean. I think it's important we do think in that way. So for me, this is absolutely non-negotiable, especially, well, again, another Gandhi phrase, when things are challenging, you need to double up your self-care rather than let it go. So I get up early. I've got 2 children. I'm never quite sure when we're going to get up. So I get up early to make sure I have time to do this. And I meditate for 5 minutes first thing. And I journal for 5 minutes first thing. So if I've got a lot on, I can sometimes wake up and feel anxious. If I meditate, it disperses. Just taking that time to settle for me. If I then write down, it really clears my head. It makes a huge, huge difference. So those two are absolutely essential for me every day. I also enjoy yoga. So that physical stretching can release any tension in the body. It can slow the mind. So I try and do yoga most days as well. That one is a little bit more optional, but that's and I can just see Eric's putting there. Music's a great one as well.
Yeah, isn't it just?
Every day. Great way to give a voice to your emotions. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, a huge thank you for bringing your time, your energy, and your insight into this conversation today, Matt. I really hope the audience tuning in found it useful. In May, it's Mental Health Awareness Week. It's a great opportunity to use this as a springboard to drive conversations around this important subject within your organization. So we're going to be using this as an opportunity to be looking at ways organizations can support individuals within the workplace that are living with a mental health diagnosis, enabling them still to thrive and to perform at their best. So we really hope that you will be able to join us for that conversation. Finally, if you'd like to discuss how to support your people in the workplace, then please do reach out to us at Point 3 Wellbeing. We would be happy to help. But that is all for now. So a huge thank you to Matt once again. And be well, be happy, be you. Take care all. Have a lovely rest of the day. Bye-bye.